Hi everybody, Vigorous Rapscallion here, and today we are going to be talking about holsters. I love holsters in VR games. They feel great, but they can be a little difficult to get correct. We're going to split this into pretty digestible chunks. We're going to start with just how do we get a place in space where we can grab an object and have it pop out. That's going to be the first one. Then we're going to see how do we put an object into that space and have it keep track of it. And lastly, we're going to see how to place the holders on the body, and even how to allow the user to adjust where those holsters are for whatever feels most comfortable for them. So let's take a look at what we've got so far. I've got this barrel that looks like it has nothing in it, but if you grab in the center, a javelin spawns, and you can throw that javelin. Also, if you let go of it and grab it again, if I could get it, it still throws fine. When my hands did glitch out there. And we can still grab more of them. This is just infinite spawning here, but it would be pretty easy to make it so that you would have a set number of these that could spawn or a cooldown. Alright, so let's see how to set that up. So we're going to be doing the same thing except for this exhibit here, which is our free throwable object. I've got a little barrel set up here that's kind of, made to look like it's full of these objects. These are just static objects. They're all part of the mesh. We're not actually going to be grabbing those. We're going to be grabbing a spawned object kind of from the center of the barrel here. So the first thing we need to do is make a new grab component. So you're going to go down here and search for your grab component. Now, you could copy this, but the problem is there's already a lot of logic on your VR pawn that uses this already. So you'd have to copy and paste all of that logic and have it reference this new grab component you made. That's not a good solution. So instead, we're going to use a child. Now, I haven't really talked about children on the channel yet, so we'll do a brief introduction to that. Let's call this grab component ball barrel. And open it up. So it doesn't look like there's a lot going on or we can really edit anything. So how is this useful? Basically, this is the exact same actor as its parent. However, you can change small things or add logic that the parent doesn't have. And we know that what we want to change is the actual pickup. So if you go over here, you'll see this little box next to functions that says override. You click on that, and you'll see all of the functions from the parent. Well, we know we want to try to grab something, so let's take a look at that. Right now, all it's doing is calling the parent's try grab function and doing the same thing with its own references. We don't want that at all, so let's just delete that. What do we want to happen? Well, we want a ball to spawn, and then we want it to attach to the hand. So first, let's spawn that ball. Let's spawn actor from class. Throwable free. And there we go. And where do we want it to spawn? Well, probably right where this is just fine. So let's get a reference to self. And then let's get world transform. Neaten that up a bit. Give it a little hat. There we go. Okay, great. So now this object is going to spawn when we grab near that grab component. But it's just going to sit there, and that could be fine. I guess the player could pick it up themselves, but we don't want that in this case. What we do want to do is call the try grab on that spawned object. So you just pull out from the return value there, and try grab component snap. Let's neaten this up too. There we go. And then we want to hit that return node. And you're completely done. That's all you need to do. No, I'm kidding. There's a lot more to it. And even this as it's done is not fully going to work. We're also going to need that motion controller reference for our try grab on the ball. Luckily, that's already an input from the parent. So now what's going to happen is this ball is going to spawn, and then try grab is going to be called with the motion controller that was near the holster being the motion controller it's dealing with. Let's try it out. So next we need to put this on the object that we're going to be using as our kind of holster space. So let's go ahead and go to viewport here, and let's add our new grab component, which is grab component ball barrel. You don't necessarily need to parent it to, make it the child of anything specific, but I'm just going to do barrel. Also, while we're at it, let's make sure barrel's static. Yeah, you want all these to be static. Usually, you wouldn't want to attach a grab component to a static object because it can't move, so grabbing it would do nothing. But since we don't want to grab this object itself, it is fine. Let's go ahead and move that up so it's easy for the player to grab. Let's move it a little above the kind of rigmarole of all the balls there. All right, so here we are at our new barrel. Let's go ahead and see what happens when we try and grab something from it. There we go. Well, that's not great because this is a free grab. I would suggest using these with snaps. You saw how it worked with snaps on the javelin there. And that's all going to be based on this object. So we could just go into settings and change this to snap if we wanted to, but it doesn't really matter in this case. So let's try and throw it. Oh. As you can see, it's still stuck to your hand. Why is that? Well, let's try grabbing it again. Okay, everything looks the same. Let's try throwing it again. And you can see, now it throws. Well, that's not really great, because the player has to hit grip twice, and if they try and do that, as you just saw, right at the grab component, it's going to spawn again and keep on spawning. And that's not what we want. So let's take a look at the code and figure out why it's doing this. So because we're just calling the logic that's on the grab component there, on the original grab component that we created a child of, that shouldn't be what's causing our problem. Our problem is probably in the other actor in this equation, which is our VR pawn. So let's take a look here. This is how grabbing's working in our VR pawn. You press the button, it checks for a grab component near the hand. If it gets one, great. It calls try grab. So we are here. It's going to try grab on this holster here. And then it's going to call the try grab from the object that we're spawning. But then we see here, we're going to set the held component after that. And since this try grab isn't returning is held, well, then it's not going to know what that is. We also don't actually want this to be the nearest component, because if it's set this to held component left, now we've got a reference to the holster, and it will attempt to drop that instead of the object that we're looking at. So we need to explicitly assign this held component somewhere else. Now, we could modify it here and assign the held by hand to the component that we want to be referenced as either a left held component or a right held component. But we're going to run into a small issue there, which is that functions are all going to go on the same tick. So basically, if you do this is held and you have something that relies on checking the held by hand, well, it's not held by that yet. In fact, it's probably going to be showing is held on the grab component that is attached to the actual hand. You see, this already sets is held, but that's all going to happen on the same tick. So when this executes, is held is going to be false. So it doesn't know what hand it's held by. Let's try something else. Let's go ahead and search for our throwable object. That's throwable free. While we're at it, actually I'm going to leave it. So you can see there's a lot going on here. If you didn't see my last video on throwing objects, I know this looks like a whole bunch of gobbledygook, which it partially is. But the important thing is we want something to happen on grabbed. So let's go ahead and move that back out a little bit. And what we want to do is assign to held by on our VR pawn, held component left or held component right. So we need to first figure out what hand we're in. Luckily, the grab component has a function for just that. Get held by hand. Let's neaten this up, give that a little hat. And then we're going to use a switch statement here. Switch on E controller hand, and that's going to return either the left or the right. but we don't know what we want to deal with, so let's go ahead and get actor of class. And we're going to be looking for our VR pawn. Now, note that this works fine for a single-player game. However, in multiplayer, it's just going to be grabbing one of the VR pawns, and that is not going to work at all. If you wanted to set up the same thing for a multiplayer game, you're going to want to get a reference to the specific VR pawn that picked it up. That's a little more code, and we're going to keep it simple because it won't matter in this case. So, in the case that it is the left hand, we're going to drag out from that VR pawn that we just discovered, and we are going to set held component left. There we go. And that is going to be our grab component right there. Now we want the same thing to happen, but for the right hand, so set held component right. Great. And then the rest we want to be the same. Sorry if this is a little confusing. I should have called this boolean something else since is held is already taken. That's a totally separate is held. Don't even worry about it. Don't even trip. So let's head back in and see if we get the behavior we want, which is the ball releasing without having to re-grab it after you pick it up out of the barrel. Okay, let's see if our barrel is working. We can grab a ball. We can throw a ball. Let's try it again. Now let's go over to one of these ones that are on the ground, which would be the same as if you picked one of these up and dropped it. Throw that. Let's go back. Didn't quite get it. There we go. And that still works. Now, if you set this up and you're finding that you're having a weird issue where it goes back to its last behavior, where you have to grab twice to get it to work correctly, it's most likely because you have that reference being set a little further along in the logic. You want all of this to get set as close to the beginning as possible, or it's not going to work right. So that's all you need for like a basic holster that's going to hold a gun. And if that's all you're interested in doing, you can stop the video here and wait for part 2. However, let's say you wanted to hold ammo, like a certain amount of things, and wanted to also be able to put more in. We'll get into putting more in part 2. But you're going to need some way to keep track of that in the holster object. Or if you wanted to, say, give the player a cooldown where there was infinite objects, but they couldn't just grab them as quick as possible, they would have to wait a little bit for a respawn. Let's see how to set those two things. So we're going to be working with the javelin barrel instead, not for any particular reason. I just feel like throwing javelins instead of balls for a little bit. So what we need to happen here is we need an amount of javelins that are available in the barrel, and we need that to go down by 1. Pretty much every time you grab it. So we could do that in the object itself, but it's going to be more robust if we do it in our grab component. So it's going to be this grab component holster up here. And we're going to need a couple of variables to start with. Let's call this one out of ammo. And then we're going to, I don't know why I didn't want to call it that. Let's do ammo out. And then let's do one for bullets. Just javelins in this case, but we're just going to call it bullets. And we're going to make that an integer. Let's compile, and let's default that to 4. So we'll have 4 javelins available. Next, we're going to go over to our try grab. And if ammo out is true, we don't want anything to happen. So let's go ahead and branch that out. Get rid of that. Attach that, and if it's false, it's going to do the rest of the logic here. So if this did work out okay, that's from something I was testing earlier, then we are going to want to have bullets go down by 1. So let's go ahead and grab bullets, get bullets, and let's decrement it. There we go. Now, we want to set this ammo out if we have 0 bullets left. So let's put this at the end here. Let's do a check on bullets. And equals. If it's equal to 0, then we want to set ammo out to true. Now, we don't have any way to turn this back right now because we're not going to put in the function to, add more bullets to this thing yet. That will be in part 2. But once this is set, that should keep this from executing again, which will keep bullets from continuing to get decremented every time you try and grab. Okay, so if everything is in working order here, we should be able to grab 4 javelins, and then no javelins. Let's try and get that top one there. Oh, way too high. Got one more shot. Still flubbed it. And look at that. Now we cannot grab any more. That's awesome. So we're out of ammo, can't do anything. That's cool. We also said we want to try and do this where it's going to give you a cooldown before you can grab another javelin again. And as long as we're doing that, since we already have the logic for an amount of ammo, let's have it add ammo up to 4. So you can have a total sort of cache of 4 javelins. And once you've even thrown 1, it'll start a timer that is going to basically add more javelins in at set intervals. Let's try that out. Next, let's set it up so that our bullets replenish after a given amount of time. Now, we're going to do this in Jav Barrel, and luckily, because our grab component there is a child, we have this ungrabbed function that's going to get called. So, let's start a timeline off of this. Let's just leave it named the default. And we don't actually need to put anything on this track because we're just going to be using the completion of the timeline. Let's go back to event. And we're going to be dealing with bullets here. So let's grab our grab component and get bullets. Now, when this finishes, we want more bullets to be added, but only in the case that we don't already have 4 or more bullets. So let's go ahead and get a less than again. Set that to 4. Branch that out. So when this finishes its timeline, which is 5 seconds, it's going to check if we already have 4 bullets. If we don't, it's going to keep doing its other stuff. So we want to add to bullets. So let's go ahead and add 1. And then we are going to set bullets. To itself plus 1. That's great. Let's go ahead also to make sure that this is working correctly. I like to use sounds when I'm debugging it in VR. Just makes it a little easier to keep track of things. Let's go ahead and use camera shutter. And that way we'll be able to hear when this replenishes, because we don't have a visual set up right now, which is relatively simple to do, but would make the video too long. So from there, after we set bullets, well, we've also got in our holster here this ammo out thing. So we're going to need to reset that. So let's go ahead and set ammo out back to false, and that will let us grab again. Otherwise, what would happen is we would get more bullets, but we wouldn't be able to grab them, which kind of defeats the purpose. Now, if this happens, we actually want to keep on doing this until we're back to 4. Since we already have this logic to check if we're at 4, at the end of this, we can just have this play from start again. That way, if the player grabs another javelin, it's not going to interrupt this. It's just going to keep playing through. If you wanted to set it up that way, so like there was a cooldown every time before grabbing, you just put it into play to play from start instead. But we're going to do it on play. Let's go ahead and compile. And let's see how it works. Okay, so let's just grab one to start with. Hoocha. And that little noise should have been our javelin resetting, and it should only have 4 in there. Let's try and grab all 4 as quick as we can. There we go. I guess the timer was going through as it did that. Okay, so that's 1. Let's try it again. Now we've got nothing. Now we've got 1 again. Nothing. And let's see if it's going to do all 4. That was 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's try again. 2, 3, 4. You can see it takes about 5 seconds for me to grab 4. And then there's 1 again. So just keep doing its thing. Great for like if you're at like a boss fight and you want like ammo available but don't want the player to just be able to stock up completely every time. This type of cooldown could be kind of fun. That's going to be it for today's video. Thank you all for watching. In part 2, we're going to get into how to put things into the holsters and get similar functionality, and how to use these holsters for ammo. Then in part 3, we're going to show you how to place them around the player and allow the player to move them themselves. Thank you all for watching. As always, have a great day.